Georgia loves to tout that it is the leader in democracy among not only former Soviet countries, but also in Eastern Europe as well. In our video, Explained, Georgia After the Rose Revolution, we examine the success of Georgia's reforms, both economic and democratic, over the past 20 years. We compare Georgia to itself. This video, however, will compare Georgia to our modern political understanding of democratic theory. In short, is Georgia a democracy? This topic is still extremely contentious in Georgia today. With that being said, whether you agree or disagree with this video, we strongly encourage you to look at our full bibliography, which has been provided in the description of this video. Now that that's out of the way, to first answer this question, we first have to know what a democracy is and is not. We'll first discuss some common misconceptions about democracy. First, democracy does not mean that ideas and values are represented. Take the United States, for example. In the US, geographic districts are represented in Congress. The House of Representatives gets its members from congressional districts, which are drawn by the very representatives who will run for office in those districts. This process of ensuring that the current House of Representatives members always wins the elections in their districts, redistricting, is conducted every 10 years. Just take a look at how Missouri's 3rd Congressional District, the orange one, has been stretched out further from its original purpose to represent the southern neighborhoods of St. Louis, to where it now includes nearly the entire central part of Missouri. The U.S. Senate is composed of 2 representatives from each state. Nowhere in the U.S. federal legislature are political parties and social values the primary source for representation. Despite this and many other shortcomings, the U.S. is still considered to be one of the world's exemplary democracies. Second, equal separation of powers is pertinent to being a democracy. Although democracies generally keep their judicial branch separate from the rest of the government, the role that the legislature has in the executive are often intermixed. In most parliamentary systems, for example the UK, the executive and legislative branches are merged into one, with the Prime Minister being both the head of the executive and legislative branches. Other countries, such as Germany, France, and Georgia, have both a parliament and a separate executive branch in the form of a president. Third, democracies cannot have a strongman style of government. This isn't true. Just look at France. The National Assembly, which is the French Parliament, is a pretty weak institution. In fact, in the French system, the president is the most powerful institution, while the parliament is more or less just a rubber stamp, similar to Russia. So what then are the cornerstones of democracy? Luckily, we have a copy of the definitive textbook on democratization, which was written by Samuel P. Huntington. Huntington built off of what Joseph Schumpeter wrote in 1942, that democracy is an institutional arrangement for arriving at political decisions in which individuals acquire the power to decide by means of a competitive struggle for the people's vote. And Robert Dahl's assertion that democracies have 2 components, competition and participation. Huntington added 5 of his own points to these 2 prevailing definitions of contemporary democracy. 1. The definition of democracy in terms of elections is a minimal definition. 2. A society could choose its political leaders through democratic means, but these political leaders might not exercise real power. 3. That fragility and stability of a country matter. 4. The issue of whether to treat democracy and non-democracy as a dichotomous or continuous variable. And 5. Non-democratic regimes do not have electoral competition and widespread voting participation. So what does that actually mean? The defining feature of a democracy is elections, but it is important that the people being elected are elected through a free and fair method, and that the elected officials have meaningful power. Otherwise, the elections are just for show. It also means that a country might have meaningful elections, but if it is at risk of being overthrown by a military coup, or if the democratically elected government is controlling the media or the court system, then is that country truly democracy? Finally, the line between a democratic country and a non-democratic country doesn't exist because there is no true definition of what a democracy is. So where does Georgia fit into all of this? Let's first take a look at elections. Georgia's elections before Saakashvili weren't deemed free or fair. However, from the March 28, 2004 parliamentary elections onward to the October and November 2018 parliamentary elections, the main oversight body of the EU, the OSCE, has stated that Georgia's elections are free, fair, and competitive. What's more, the average participation rate for Georgia's past 3 parliamentary elections is 52.5%, and the average participation rate for the past 4 parliamentary elections is 57.5%, which is far higher than the highest turnout for a US midterm congressional election, which is a congressional election that occurs between presidential elections. The participation rate for the 2014 midterm in the US was only 36.7% and only 41% in 2010. Clearly, participation in Georgia's elections is fairly high. What's more, the Georgian parliament has most of the power in Georgian politics, with the president having mostly symbolic roles now. As we discussed in our Explained Georgia's Political Parties video, there are 4 main political parties in Georgia, with dozens of smaller registered political parties. All of this means that Georgia has both participation and competition. So far, Dahl would be pretty happy with Georgia's democracy. Georgia also meets Huntington's first 2 key points of democracy. The third point is far trickier and is subject to interpretation. How do you define fragility and stability? One organization, the Fund for Peace, created the Fragile States Index to answer this question. According to them, Georgia ranks 81st out of 178 countries, with the 178th country being Finland, the most stable in the world, and the first, Yemen, the least stable. This ranking, which uses indicators such as cohesion indicator trends and economic indicator trends, is certainly interesting to look at and can be helpful to glean the big picture. The conservative Heritage Foundation recently published their 2020 Index of Economic Freedom report, which they look at the rule of law, government size, regulatory efficiency, and open markets to determine how free a given country is. Georgia ranks 12th, ahead of Iceland, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, the US, and Finland. Even back to 2012, Georgia ranked 34th in the world, above Spain, Belgium, and Norway. Georgia ranks similarly well in the World Bank's Doing Business report. The reason why these 2 types of reports matter is because they analyze corruption, the strength of property rights, the transparency of a country's tax code, and the regulatory environment. The World Bank goes so far to say that those economies that score well on doing business tend to benefit from higher levels of entrepreneurial activity and lower levels of corruption. It comes as a little surprise that the majority of the countries that score well on both the Heritage Foundation's index and the World Bank index are overwhelmingly democratic countries. Where Georgia tends to not do as well is in the realm of judicial independence. The EU has repeatedly stated that Georgia has yet to implement meaningful reforms in its judicial branch. This is important for the survival of democracy because an independent court system ensures that the laws are not only properly enforced, but that the government cannot selectively enforce the law. What's more, in Georgia, the line between holding past politicians to justice and political retribution is very thin and often a matter of opinion. The arrest of opposition leaders, both politician and prominent business members, for past crimes years after the crime occurred still happens. One final facet of a democracy is the freedom of the press. Georgia's media scene is diverse, yet polarized. Like the US, each major end of the political spectrum has a favorable television network. In Georgia, E-Medi is favorable to the Georgian Dream Democratic Georgia Coalition, while the embattled Rustavi Ori and newly formed Tavari Arche are favorable to the United National Movement and critical of the Georgian Dream Coalition. Additionally, it is possible to view foreign television networks such as the BBC, Fox, CNN, and even Russian stations in Georgia. Despite this diversity, the Georgian government has, both in the past and present, used the courts to influence the media. Perhaps the most crucial element of democracy wasn't even mentioned by Schumpeter, Dahl, or Huntington. That idea is bounded uncertainty, which means that even if you lose now, there's always the next time. The Georgian Dream Coalition used this idea to gain control not only of the Georgian parliament in 2012, but also the presidency in 2013 and again in 2018. Now, the United National Movement is struggling with this idea after it lost numerous parliamentary and presidential elections. Despite the opposition boycotting the 2017 constitutional reform process, it continued to seek dialogue with the Georgian Dream Coalition until, on the 9th of March 2020, both sides came to an agreement for a new parliamentary reform which would take effect for the upcoming October 2020 parliamentary elections. Georgia's opposition parties continue to participate in its elections. Georgia sees a high voter turnout. Its elected officials hold meaningful power. Its regulatory environment is seen as being open, transparent, and reliable. And its media is diverse, albeit extremely fragmented and polarized. These seem to hit the mark of Huntington's key points of what a democracy is. Now, it's up to you to determine precisely where on the road of democracy to autocracy Georgia sits. For more information about Georgia, visit our website www.visiting-georgia.com. Thanks for watching.